Greetings, and thank you for joining us for Brainpower Chronicles 2020, presented by NAMI Washington. My name is Gabriel Spitzer. I'm a science reporter, most recently with KNKX, the Seattle NPR affiliate. And in my career, I've covered the news and I've covered politics. I've covered a raging pandemic. But the thing that really sticks out to me about my work is just the power of human stories. There's a great radio producer named Scott Carrier who once said that people have been telling stories for millions of years. We are hardwired for it. People will choose a story over sex, over drugs, even over rock and roll. I've come to appreciate that more and more over the years. I mean, stories are an invitation to walk in someone else's shoes. And that's always been important, but right now, with the crises that we face and with so many of the ways that we're used to connecting with one another cut off from us, no hugs, no heart-to-hearts over a cup of tea, that these stories can be our lifeboat. They can be this way of reaching out across space and politics and saying, hey, here's what it's like to be me. This is the fourth edition of the Brainpower Chronicles series. We normally do this in a packed theater to an eager audience, but today, of course, is different because, as you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so we're taking precautions and playing the Brainpower Chronicles to an empty theater. And this is also where the storytellers are going to be standing and telling their stories as well. So it's a little tricky to play to an empty room. So that means that you folks need to be our audience. We need you to send some love and good vibes and maybe even some applause our storytellers' way. And of course, if you want to make a donation to support the incredibly important work of NAMI Washington, the link and number to do that will be on your screen the whole time. So with that, I'm honored to present to you a series of incredible stories by people with different kinds of intimate connections to mental health struggles. And I invite you all to walk with us in their shoes now. For our first story today, we have a story about the tribulations that seem reserved especially for those who are caring with loved ones with mental illness. And for those of us who have been in that position before, you will recognize the anguish and the frustration, but also the profound power of just loving someone for who they are. Miriam Feldman wrote a book about her family's experiences. It's called He Came In With It, A Portrait of Motherhood and Madness. And she brings us a slice of that story here now.
If you were to make a list of red flags for serious mental illness and a list of normal teenage behavior, you'd have virtually the same list. Let's face it, most teenagers behave, shall we say, oddly. They all have major mood swings. They're all irrational, impulsive, confused, all things that are symptoms of mental illness. So how was I supposed to know my son was developing schizophrenia? I thought, he's just like all the other kids. He'll grow out of it. But he didn't. It got worse. All the other kids were planning for graduation and applying to colleges, and Nick was struggling just to get out of bed in the morning. One day, I'm walking by his room, and I see him lying on his bed with his face to the wall. He'd just broken up with his girlfriend, so I go in to try and cheer him up. He tells me how sad he is, and I tell him there are going to be so many other girls, this will be just a blip on the radar. Then he turns and looks at me and he says, Mom, I'm afraid of my own thoughts. I have really bad thoughts. Yikes. I tell him, don't worry about your thoughts. We all have bad thoughts. Thoughts don't matter. What matters is what you do. Perfect mom answer, right? Only now I look back on it and I realize he was starting to hear voices. And I told him, a person developing a thought disorder, that thoughts don't count. Yikes again. You know, I think that was the moment that I knew on some level he wasn't like all the other kids. We find out he's smoking pot and doing other drugs, so initially we address it as a substance abuse problem. We send him to rehab and therapy. Now I know he was probably self-medicating to subdue the voices. It progresses from there. He's diagnosed with depression, then anxiety, then bipolar, and finally, when he's 20, they tell us it's schizophrenia. Right out of the gate, I'm convinced that I can fix it. I mean, I grew him. I brought him into this world. Surely I can fix this. And just as surely, something I did must have caused it. It had to be my fault. He manages to graduate high school by the skin of his teeth and then miraculously is accepted into a really good college. I'm ecstatic. We all run around getting ready to go. Some sort of collective delusional thinking, I guess. I mean, how did we think this was going to turn out? I'm standing in the driveway, waving like some prom queen in a parade, as Nick backs out in his beat-up truck, all loaded up for school. He glances back at me, flashes his dazzling smile, and takes off down the street. It's a sunny day. His sisters are jumping up and down and yelling goodbye. I'm smiling, but even before I see him reach the corner, I'm overcome with a sense of dread. In my mind's eye, I can see that car driving right back up the street in defeat. It's just a matter of when. It's a week later, really early on a Sunday morning, and somebody's pounding on the front door. I run downstairs, open the door to find Nick babbling incoherently. "What are you doing here?" I say. "School starts tomorrow." He barges past me, spouting all kinds of upsetting stuff as his sisters stare open-mouthed, and ends up picking up a cup, throwing it through a window, smashing glass everywhere. At which point my husband steps in, saying, "Get out of this house right now. You cannot come in here, smashing things, upsetting your mother and your sisters. I want you out of here now." We all stand there, staring at each other like we're in some standoff in an old Western. Until finally my middle daughter says, "Wait a minute. Mom, Dad, what are you doing? Look at him. Something is really wrong with him. You can't just throw him out of here. He's your son. You need to help him." I look at Nick. He's sweating, his hands are shaking, there's no pupils in his eyes, and I know what I have to do. I turn to her and I say, "Okay, come on. We're going to take him to the hospital." And that's how my 15-year-old daughter became my wingman at the first hospitalization of my son. At the hospital, I'm useless. I cannot open my mouth without bursting into tears. I can't answer any questions. I can't advocate for Nick. All I can do is cry. Lucy has to handle everything. At one point, I'm walking down the hallway like a zombie, and I see a woman with a big shiny metal cart all piled up with towels. We catch each other's eye for just a moment, and then the next time around, she takes my arm, pulls me into a closet, and closes the door. She motions to an upside-down bucket, and I sit down thinking, what in the world? She says to me, "Listen to me. I want to tell you something. My husband is sick like your son. I know what this is. The doctors and the nurses, they're so overworked, you're not going to be able to count on them. You are the mother. You got to get strong. Don't let anyone push you around." I start bawling again, of course. She puts her hand on my shoulder and says, "I know you just want to cry forever, but you can't." I look up at her thinking, please just tell me this isn't happening. I think she must have read my mind because she looks me in the eye and she says, "This isn't going to go away. This is it now. Don't waste time wishing it wasn't real." She takes my hands in hers for just a moment, and leaves. Sitting there on my bucket in the janitor's closet, I think I felt as lost as I've ever felt in my entire life. So they put Nick on a 72-hour hold and transfer him to a psychiatric ward. There's really nothing for us to do but go home. I make dinner. Nobody's talking at the dinner table. I think we were all in shock. It was like a hurricane had blown through the house, and we were all going through the motions of a normal dinner, but all the furniture was upside down. After dinner, I do the thing that I used to do back then when everything got too much to bear. I'd go in the bathroom and lock the door, run the shower, and lie down on the cool tile floor for a good cry, where nobody can hear me, because I'm still pretending everything is okay. Who was I kidding? When I'm done, I splash cold water on my face and walk out right into my youngest daughter, busted. "Mom," she says, "why are you crying?" And I say, "I'm crying because I miss your brother." And she says, "What do you mean? He's not gone. It's only for a night." And I say, "Yeah, but he's not who he was supposed to be." And she says, "Yeah, he is. It's just not what you thought." Boom. She walks nonchalantly off to her room, and I plop down in the window seat. Talk about out of the mouths of babes. I think that was one of the most powerful things anyone's ever said to me. It was like a light went on. In the weeks to come, I have a real shift in perspective. I realize I have to let go of the way I thought it was going to be. I have to look at Nick and see him, not my idea of some future that isn't going to materialize. This is how he came to us. We may not have been able to see it at the time, but this is the son that I brought into this world, and I damn well better learn how to be his mother. It was on me. You know, once I stopped throwing myself up against the wall of non-resistance, things got better. They talk about the difficulty of treating a patient who doesn't know that he's ill, lack of insight, or anosognosia. Well, I think that we mothers have our own version of anosognosia. From the second you know you are pregnant, you are in love with your child, with his future, with all your ideas of how it's going to be. It all exists in its complete form from that moment forward. Letting go of that is hard. But once I did, I found I was able to meet my son where he really was, and we were able to go forward from there. And that is how I have to fix this became I have to understand this. The other day, I went to Nick's place for lunch. I walked in through the sliding glass doors and paused for a minute, just looking at him. His back was to me. He was sitting at his work table painting. His artwork was piled up all around. Bob Dylan was playing. The air was light and warm, and I thought, this isn't so bad. It's a life. This is his life. He heard my keys and turned around, and there was that dazzling smile. Schizophrenia is arguably one of the worst mental illnesses. It manifests itself in ways that are unknowable. A lot of the time, it's ugly. It can be violent. It takes over. After bearing witness to this for 15 years, I take comfort in this. My son, Nick O'Rourke, is a human being of such intrinsic goodness that even schizophrenia could not touch it. He still has as beautiful a soul as the day that he was born. And that is not going to change.
We all know that mental illness doesn't care how successful we are, or how smart we are, or even how good we are. There's still so much stigma around coming out of our various closets, and that's especially the case when you are perceived to be one of society's success stories. Robert Goodwin brings us our next story. It's about role reversals and humility, and ultimately about resilience.
It's the start of November 2015, and life is great. I'm working as a public defender, a job I love. I get paid to fight the man every day, to stand up on a soapbox and make impassioned arguments on behalf of poor and marginalized people, while helping them on their paths to recovery and redemption. I feel nearly absolved of my upper middle class white guilt. I've got a clean bill of health, no physical or mental diagnoses to speak of, a great family, good friends, and I just started dating a woman I think I might marry. But you see, all of that is making it really hard to understand why just 2 weeks later, I'm being held down on the tile floor of the Fairfax Behavioral Health Hospital. There are 2 security guards on top of me, and a bear of a man dressed like a nurse has his huge forearm pressed firmly against my throat. I'm not resisting, even though no one's grip relaxes. I stare into that bear's vacant eyes, and I curse him. God will punish you for this. And I believe it. And for a moment, the fury within me abates, but only to be replaced by a sense of existential dread, because I know what's about to happen. I am about to be involuntarily medicated. And while I can't be sure what they're going to give me, I am damn sure what they're taking from me, my last remaining shred of dignity and psychological autonomy. I'll spend 12 eventful days in that hospital, receive multiple death threats, get attacked by a man with a teardrop tattoo, and voluntarily spend time in a padded room just to feel safe. But in the end, none of that will be the worst part of my stay. You see, that came the night of November 27th, after a day spent celebrating America's most decadent holiday, Black Friday. You do things a bit different when you're celebrating in an involuntary mental institution. There, the only lines you'll find are for food or meds. So instead of spending my day shopping for savings, I celebrate by dressing up in my finest whites instead. My parents had brought me this great suit for my civil commitment hearing, but that didn't end up happening. You know, within 72 hours of being committed, you're supposed to see a judge who will decide if you're gravely disabled or imminently dangerous because of a mental disease or defect. And only then could you be detained. I'm sure that I'm neither of those things. But at these hearings, the deck is stacked against you. A judge can rely on hearsay. You can't call any of your own witnesses. And what good is anything you say when you say it from the cuckoo's nest? So my lawyer works out a deal. If I agree to continue the hearing for 9 days and take mood-stabilizing meds and to behave, they'll dismiss the petition and I'll be free to go. I don't like this deal. I don't want to take it. But I know how the story usually ends when a self-righteous client decides to trust their judgment over their lawyers. So I swallow some pride and get comfortable, which is why today, Black Friday, I'm in this white suit. But I don't just look good, I'm feeling good too. I've already been here a week. I've made it past the hump. I don't have to squint to see the light at the end of this tunnel. But when I was just meeting with a psych nurse, something took a turn. She's telling me I need to start taking more meds, an antipsychotic. But I'm not going to take an antipsychotic. I'm not psychotic. But now I am scared because my release is conditioned on my compliance. My lawyer training takes over. I grab out a sheet of paper and I have Nurse Ratchet list out for me each of her observations that support her conclusion I need a med change. On a separate sheet, I write out each of the ways in which I'm committed to addressing those concerns. I have a copy placed in my file and I hide the originals under my bed. I am like an angel when I return to the afternoon's group session. I get excellent marks for my behavior and participation. It's a few hours later when I step up to the window for my evening meds. The med nurse pushes out a double dose of the mood stabilizer as well as this new med, the antipsychotic. I swallow the mood meds without hesitation, but decline the rest. Now the staff tries talking me into taking the pills, but I've already made up my mind. And after all, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I know that even a murder suspect is entitled to a hearing before facing forced medication. Surely the same is true about me. But around 10, the time for conversation was over. The staff sends all the other patients to their rooms to make sure there aren't any unnecessary witnesses for what comes next. When security approached me, they lifted their hands, readying themselves for a fight. But I don't fight. I just stand there, waiting, drowning in my righteous indignance, until a nurse with a twisted grin and a loaded syringe stabs that needle into my flesh, flushing my nervous system with the most powerful antipsychotic known to man, a potential neurotoxin. The next several days, under duress, I take everything the med nurse puts in front of me. That injection was terrible. It caused a horrible headache, nightmares, and extreme nausea the next day. It was hard to imagine any pill that could do worse. I feel like a coward for capitulating and in compromising on my convictions. I do find some small comfort knowing that the prosecutor can't dispute my compliance. I upheld my end of the bargain, so the government upholds theirs. The petition against me is dismissed and I'm free. They send me home with some pill bottles to help me stay well. But the pills look more like poison to me because they had put me through hell. I waste no time flushing them away because I don't need those pills anyways. I'll show everyone. My next year and a half is a tumultuous time as I try to put my life back together. Thanks to an unfortunate post I made the night I was committed, my entire network knows about it. I am indignant about what happened, but those feelings are overshadowed by my embarrassment, my humiliation, and my shame. It will be months before I'm willing to accept I have bipolar disorder at all. And even then, I refuse to take meds. In February, I'm back to work, but my every move is being scrutinized. If I do or say anything off script, my sanity is suspect. I have to provide routine letters from my counselor just to confirm my stability. And one day, when I went to see my counselor, she was on vacation. So I saw the psychiatrist instead. But the psychiatrist didn't want to offer an opinion because I haven't been taking any meds. So instead, the doc said, I need to get a psych eval. And unfortunately, they don't offer them, and my insurance wouldn't pay for them. So on to medical leave I go. Eventually, I find the right PhD, and $5,000 later, I have a forensic assessment giving me the green light to go back to work. All's well for about 2 months, until once again, more concerns are raised about my mental health. This time, my employer wants a second opinion. So I'm going to be on a medical leave until I can get through a forensic evaluation from the provider of their choosing. Now, one unexpectedly good thing comes of this third medical leave. It led me to my first NAMI support group. You see, my therapist, Allison, has been encouraging me to go for months, but it sounded lame. And being on medical leave doesn't make it sound any less lame, but I had that forensic assessment coming up, and I'm pretty sure that going to group is going to look good on paper. It never occurred to me that group would become such an important part of my life or help me stay alive. You see, in group, I met countless people that were suffering with my same diagnosis. They all knew what it was like to suffer the jarring loss of identity that comes with experiencing this serious diagnosis. They knew about the crushing weight of its stigma. Every week at group, there would be a different combination of faces, of fellow mutants and their friends and family members and lovers too, and all of us there to support and learn from one another in an environment free from shame. But group, it was no panacea. And in March of 2017, although I was back to work, having passed my second psych eval, I was suicidally depressed. I couldn't escape those tortured feelings or toxic thoughts. Nothing I tried worked. Though I knew there's one thing I hadn't tried: medication. Now, over the last several months, I've been religiously attending group each week, and of the countless people I met with my diagnosis, they almost all had one thing in common. They took meds. So maybe I could too. With the encouragement of my friends, I took a leap of faith and I met Dr. Dong. Going in, Dr. Dong knew my entire medical history, about all of the many prescriptions that I had let go unfulfilled over the years, about my reluctance to taking anything at all. But he didn't just dictate to me what I would take. Dr. Dong listened to me. He let me dictate, in part, that experience. I remember him saying to me, "I'd rather you take the wrong mood stabilizer than nothing at all." In the end, every day since I've walked out of Dr. Dong's office, I've taken my medication as prescribed. And that medication, it's really helped. And now, it's the end of 2020, and I'm still working as a public defender. I've got pretty good health with well-managed mental illness, no more psych evals or medical leaves, a good group of friends, a loving family, and I am engaged to the woman I'm going to marry. Thanks to a number of people, providers, and pills, my life is once again truly great.
I think of this next story as kind of our superhero story. It's just less cape and tights and more black coffee and long hours. The professionals who work in behavioral health are truly lifesavers, but they're also human beings touched in their own unique ways by the challenges of mental illness. Alice Nichols is a social worker and a mental health administrator, and she brings us this next story about how when we see a loved one suffering, we try and make sense of it, even if it's at our own expense.
I'm 7 years old in my brownie uniform with a beanie. I'm at a local TV station, and they're doing a program on cats and dogs at the local animal shelter that need to be adopted. The camera pans to my face. I'm sobbing. Tears are streaming down my face. I'm feeling guilty. I feel responsible. I want to save every cat and every dog. It seemed like an hour later, but it was probably only a few seconds. The camera pans away from my face. The moderator implores all of the listeners to adopt the cats and dogs. I feel relief. I, as a child, was responsible for all human suffering. I had to right every injustice. Those starving kids in China, that was on me. So, of course, I was responsible for my mother's depression and my father's anger as he came back from Vietnam. Being responsible for all the world's suffering, it's a bit of a tough gig for a kid. So, in fact, I channeled all of that guilt and responsibility into achievement, into perfectionism. So much so that by the time I graduated from my Catholic high school, I was valedictorian. and, hard to believe, voted most Christ-like. What type of profession is ideal for someone responsible for all human suffering? Well, of course, I became a social worker. I took that same sense of achievement and perfectionism into my life as a social worker. I studied every best practice. I worked with every client to have the best possible outcome. I became a supervisor, a manager, a director. I comforted mothers who had children with mental illness. I told them, the best mother can't prevent mental illness, and the worst mother doesn't cause it. Naturally, I took the same achievement and perfectionism into my life as a mother. I read every parenting book. I may be the only woman in America that followed perfectly what to eat when you're expecting. So, despite my perfectionism and achievement, maybe because of it, my marriage fails. I become a single mother. My son was 7 years old, and I go to pick him up at the daycare. He has had a bad day. I look at Loretta, his daycare lady. Whew, she clearly has had a bad day. Her assistant glances at me and quickly glances away. I wonder if she's being critical or maybe scared. Loretta takes me aside and tells me that my son is no longer welcome at the daycare. All day long, he has been afraid that he's going to hurt somebody, and he's thinking this thought over and over and over and over. He cannot get this thought out of his head. The other children are scared. Oddly enough, my first reaction is guilt. It's my fault. I'm responsible. I did this. I set aside the guilt long enough to get my child help. That was no easy feat. I was in a rural mental health center where I was a director. I couldn't get him help at my mental health center because it would be a conflict of interest. I drove my son 150 miles one way each time he needed to go to therapy and go to the doctor. Little did I know that that is not where the story ends. A few years later, I'm having a disagreement with my then 13-year-old daughter. It was probably about a boy. They usually were. And I see on her arm scars, and they're about an inch long and maybe about an inch apart from each other. And she quickly covers it up, but I realize she's been cutting on herself. And again, I'm sad to say that my first reaction is guilt. I'm responsible. I'm at fault. This is my fault. I did this to her somehow. Fortunately, I set those feelings aside, and I get her help as well, another 150 miles across the great state of Kansas. Meanwhile, I am pouring myself into my career. I'm doing everything I can to be the best social worker that I can be. And I'm invited to be the director of mental health for the state of Minnesota. I'm excited, but I'm also struck by this discrepancy. I'm here to be the paragon of mental health for a state mental health system, and meanwhile, my mental health and my family's mental health is deteriorating. I do the best I can, and I work very hard. My children are grown. I pour myself into this career. And I realize I need help. I need support. I can't do this alone. I call my sister in the state of Washington, and I tell her I'm moving to Washington. I need to start my own recovery. And so I do. I move to Washington State. I go to therapy. I go to support groups. I talk with my friends for the first time. I had never really talked to people about what was going on with me before. And I finally open up, and I get real. Meanwhile, my kids call me at all hours of the night because they continue to have mental health symptoms. At first, I feel so guilty. I feel so responsible. It's hard to listen. It's hard to listen to them feeling sad or anxious or depressed or suicidal even. But I continue to go to therapy. I continue to get support. I continue to take care of me and talk with my friends. And slowly, I get better. Now when my kids call, I can set that aside. I can set the guilt aside, and I can really listen. And that really helps our relationship. My kids are doing well now. My son is a computer programmer, and my daughter teaches kids math. They may have mental health symptoms all their lives, but at least I can listen now. And now I actually do believe that the best mother can't prevent mental illness, and the worst mother doesn't cause it. Those starving kids in China, I guess, really weren't my fault after all.
And now a message from Washington State Representative Tana Sen.
My name is Tana Sen, and as a state representative, I have the opportunity to make policy changes to help people affected by mental illness. From teaching skills of resiliency and reducing childhood trauma, to making sure people have access to telemedicine and working to develop the workforce. Today, I'm here to ask for your help in this area too. Your help to support NAMI Washington. As you listen to the stories today from Miriam and Melissa, Michelle, Patrick, Robert, and Alice, I hope you will take their personal struggles and strength to heart. Have you ever felt isolated? Do you ever feel depressed or alone? Do you ever feel like you can't take away the pain of somebody else no matter how hard you try? Given what we're all going through right now with the pandemic, with COVID, more and more people are feeling isolated, depressed and anxious. Suicidal thoughts and mental illness are on the rise. But imagine those who are already affected by mental illness. Their situation is even more exacerbated. That is why today, your support for NAMI Washington is more important than ever. You will save lives. You will save families. You will strengthen community. So today I'm asking you not for just a gift to NAMI Washington, but I'm giving you the opportunity to act on your values. Your values can be turned into action with a donation to NAMI Washington. You wouldn't be here today if you didn't already have an affinity for these issues. But again, I'm asking you to think about what your donation can mean to the millions of people suffering with mental illness and their loved ones who are trying to help them day in and day out. Please dig deep and give a generous donation to NAMI Washington today. The information on how to do that is on your screen.
Our next teller is no stranger to the power of storytelling. She coaches storytellers, and she recently founded a new storytelling series called Melanin Stories Matter. It highlights the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. But this story is her own. It's one that's about confronting a lifelong challenge with a new ally at her side, her daughter. Here's Melissa Reeves.
We walk through the door of the executive director's office, and I'm with my 15-year-old daughter, and we sit down. We're nervous. I mean, he's the world-renowned expert in this subject matter, and he's huge. He's like a Kodiak bear and Dr. Phil have had a love child. And around his neck, he has a lanyard, and he's scratched out his name with a Sharpie, and it says, Dr. Evil. I don't care what they call me. I don't care what they say. Because at the end of the day, I'm here to help you crush your OCD. That's music to my ears. I would have loved to have had this help when I was a little kid. I'm 6 years old, and I'm growing up in homogenized Rockford, Illinois. And I'm having a fairly good life, but we have one problem as a family. We don't subscribe to a church. And in the Midwest, that's a little bit of a problem because that's your community. And I turn to my parents, my mother, who's from Oklahoma, and I say, Mommy, why don't we go to a church? Oh, Missy, when it comes to God, you decide. Because me and your daddy have already decided that we are not going to cram our religion down your throat like it happened to us. You're not going to get my Catholicism down your throat, and you're certainly not going to get Daddy's Southern Baptist down your throat. Oh, no. No. But, Mommy, everybody goes to a church. They do, I know. It's weird, but good luck. So now I'm 6 years old and I have to spiritually hitchhike with my friends to their churches. And I'm learning about Catholic churches and Christian churches and something that's episcopal. And I couldn't find my way to any church that fit. I couldn't get to the cookie that everyone wanted. And I was very frustrated. By 9 years old, I am now swearing at God. It's like, you know what? Fuck you, God. What's your problem? Why can't I get into one of your churches, huh? What's wrong with me? I mean, you could just go to hell. Whoa. He's the big guy. He can like part seas and throw lightning bolts at me. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'd start washing my hands to wash my sins away, but I can't stop swearing at God. Oh my God. I'm 13 years old. And my hands are raw. Until finally my older sister notices that I'm constantly washing my hands. She goes, Hey, Missy, what is going on here? Why do you keep doing that? And because I have scrupulosity, I just confess. And she says, oh, okay. All right, so next time that you think you want to swear at God, like right now? No, shh. No, next time you think you want to swear at God, just hold and just, say something silly, okay? Just say something silly, like tutti fruit. Tutti fruit? Yeah, tutti fruit. Just go with me, okay? Let's just try it. Okay. And so I'd be like, fuck you! Tutti fruit. Oh, tutti fruit. Tutti fruit. Tutti fruit. And it started to work. I could catch the thought, and I could just tutti fruit it away. I was tutti fruiting all over the place. And it was working. It was working for a while. I snap back into the consciousness of the real world right now, and I'm back in the office with Dr. Evil and my daughter, and he's talking to her about a test that she needs to take. And he says, okay, we're gonna now measure your OCD, okay? And if you get a 1, you don't have it at all. No one gets a 1. And if you have a 40, well, that means you're gonna need 24-hour care, and that's in Minnesota. So let's begin. We're going to ask you a bunch of questions. We're going to start with the obsessions first. He asks a series of questions, and he gets to this one, and he says, so do you have any animosity towards a religious figure? Oh, heck yeah! Oh, my God. I was swearing at God all the time when I was a kid. Ma'am? That question was for your daughter? All right. Sorry. Please, go ahead. He then moves on and he starts asking questions about her compulsions. And he says to her, do you ever feel the need that you have to check the lights or check the oven? Oh, heck yeah. Oh my God, I was ridiculous. I used to go from my car to the apartment, back to the car, to the apartment, and I always had to check the lights, check the oven, check the oven. I did it 3 times, but OCD would say, I want it 5 times. I'm like, oh, Mom! What? That question was for me. Was that out loud? Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, They finish the exam, and he says, okay, you're up there, but you're not a 40. So come on in, let's go meet your campmates, okay? He leads us into this conference room. We go through the door, and there are 5 teenagers sitting at this long table. And the parents are all sitting around, but they can't sit next to their kids because they don't want us helicoptering or reassuring our kids. And they're doing these exposure therapies already. One kid has dried ketchup on the back of his hand. A girl has maple syrup on the back of her hand. And they're practicing not having germophobia. And then there's this one little kid, and he's got his hand in this chip bag. He's making all this noise, and he's practicing to not care so much about being perfect or having judgment on him. And we're then greeted by a counselor. And she goes, hi, it's so nice to have you here, okay? So we're gonna go over some ground rules, all right? Ground rules? Yeah. First off, when your anxiety starts to go up, you're just gonna ride the wave, all right? Ride the wave. 2, thoughts are not actions, they're just thoughts. 3, you are going to do the opposite of what OCD tells you. You're just gonna, off it goes, do the opposite. And 4, you're gonna become best friends with your OCD detective. Our what? Oh, the OCD detective. See, OCD doesn't really tell us the truth, and so your job is to let your reasonable mind figure out what's real. Oh, I'm looking around the room. I'm looking at my daughter, and I'm like, we're not gonna be alone. You're not gonna be alone on this. We're gonna get help. We're gonna have a psychological love language. Yeah, let's do this. And we did. And we went 4 days a week, 3 hours a day, learning exposure therapies. And we would come home, and every night we'd have to do 2 hours of exposure therapy. And we would chip away and chip away and chip away at these compulsions and get control of the obsession. And she kept getting stronger, and her scores were going down. It was great. And she graduated. So proud of her. That was 1.5 years ago that we were in that program. And now, the world is different. It's different. It's gone from 3D to 2D. You know, the anxiety's going up in everyone. We've got face masks on. She's in remote learning. It's causing anxiety in me. And it's getting harder to remember the tools, that when she starts to have some OCD relapse, and that's expected, that I gotta dig down and be able to say, come on, do the opposite, competing response, you know what you're supposed to do, okay? And instead of being the rock that she needs, I'm sometimes just giving her rocks. It's 2 a.m., and I wake up and I can see there's light coming through the door from her bedroom. And she's stuck. She can't get into bed, I know it. I got work tomorrow. She's probably not gonna make it to school. Oh, God. I put my hand on the doorknob and I walk through.
Patrick Johnson grew up in Sunburst, Montana. He lives in Port Angeles now. And his story is one about the complex ways that family and trauma can intertwine with mental health. And it's about 2 people who grew up with a connection that was so intimate and tight, but such different circumstances that eventually their stories start to diverge. Here's Patrick Johnson with his story.
October 8th, 1950. My twin brother Mike and I had already spent 9 months together in this really little womb, before we emerged into this world. I came first, followed by Mike, him pushing, me pulling. Little did we know, even though we would spend the next 18 years, sleeping 3 feet from each other, that would be the closest that we would ever be. Our lives changed radically about 1 year later when our dad was killed in a car accident. It was devastating for my fragile mother, who was left without any marketable skills, couldn't get a job, no money, no income. We were taken care of by a flock of aunts and uncles and cousins and my grandmother, who ensured that we had food, that we had a place to live, and that we were cherished and loved and cared for. And things like that went along pretty well until all of a sudden our lives changed radically again, and the refinery in my little town closed, and my uncles were all transferred to Anacortes. Of course, my dad had died, and we didn't have a job, so we stayed in our little town. Mom's descent into mental illness had begun when my dad died, and by then she'd become really erratic, unpredictable, angry, mad, and pretty manic a lot of the time. Mike and I did the best we could, and we learned to fend for ourselves. We made our own breakfast, we got ourselves up for school, ironed our clothes, and did all of the things that we thought a mom would do. Over the course of time, she became increasingly erratic. As we got older, she would oftentimes keep us up all night so that she would have somebody to talk to. It left us tired and exhausted. She would sometimes go to school and tell our teachers how terrible we were and how to keep an eye on us. It really took a toll on our self-esteem and created a lot of problems for us during the course of our life. Because of her behavior, we became incredibly hypersensitive and hypervigilant because we never knew what was going to happen next. We were quick to anger and became extremely defensive and really uncomfortable living in that environment. As time went on, we continued to drift farther apart, and I thought that because of all of the chaos in our house, Mike and I would have developed a closeness. In fact, that we would have become allies because we shared this chaos all the time. I needed a friend, and who would be a better friend than my twin brother, Mike? But we went our own ways. He had his own friends. He lived away, it seemed like, from home for a long time. He would only come around from time to time, and that left me to take care of my mom. And I did the best I could, but I was just a kid. It was really hard. And you couldn't talk to anybody in my little town about mental illness. And nobody said anything except take care of your mother. You have to take care of your mother. And again, I tried. I did the best I could, but it was really hard as a kid. Over the course of time, I went on to college, and Mike stayed in the little town. I got a degree, got a job, got married, started a family, and Mike got a series of jobs in the little town that we grew up in. He was an expert craftsman. He could fix anything. He was a fine wood carver. He was well respected, well thought of, and very generous, and did very good work in the jobs that he had. He had a number of jobs over the course of time. In our 40s, life began to change radically for Mike. He had had physical problems his entire life. He'd injured his knee when we were in high school, and arthritis set in. The toll of his labor really began to impact his body in a variety of ways. He was always in pain, and he was always uncomfortable. He'd started drinking when we were in high school, and eventually the alcoholism took a toll on, even more of a toll on his body. He also became increasingly estranged from his family. And even though we shared that defensiveness, that uncomfortableness, that rage, that quickness to anger, I ended up in an environment where I had more support around him. And Mike was isolated in this little town where there were virtually no services. There was nobody to talk to. There were no counselors. And over the course of time, he became increasingly isolated, and even from his family. I had moved away to another state and lived in a fairly large city and came home whenever I could to see him. And over the course of time, he found himself in a situation where he couldn't stand to be around anybody else. Mike was a perfectionist, and he was totally intolerant of other people and just couldn't stand to be in the room with them. Oftentimes when I came home, people would say to me, "Why can't Mike be like you?" Well, I knew what they meant. They thought that he ought to be friendly and outgoing and all of those things. And actually, it made me feel really guilty because I oftentimes felt like I was the white knight coming into town to rescue everybody. And it was very uncomfortable for me. And I wanted to defend my brother, which I did. But it was still very hard because of his behavior. And then I got this phone call. And of course, these phone calls always come in the middle of the night. And the person on the other end of the line said, "Mike's dead." It was November 6th, 1999. He'd shot himself in the head. He was 49 years old. And of course, my Scandinavian heritage immediately kicked in, and I became stoic and went into denial and rationalized what had happened over the course of the next 20 years. I used my understanding of mental illness and the support that I had around me to deny what had happened, and I think more so to protect my own vulnerability and my own fear of what had happened to Mike. It was a very, very hard kind of thing to go through. It took me 20 years before I developed the courage to ask, why him and not me? Well, I know at least part of the answer is I had moved and lived in an environment, both through my work and with the people that I worked with, where we talked about mental illness. We understood what mental illness was. I'd had my own struggles with alcoholism and depression and all of the erratic behaviors that we had used to defend ourselves when we were kids, but came to plague us when we were adults. But again, I had access to counseling, to medication, and Mike had none of those things. And in the end, I knew why him and not me. Because in the end, Mike lost hope.
Our final story comes to us from Michelle Yang. She's an advocate who writes about the intersection of Asian American identity and feminism and mental health. And she considers herself a proud takeout kid, meaning that she grew up helping her parents run their Chinese restaurant. She also grew up knowing that something was different about her, but no one could tell her what. And it seemed like even asking was something that you were supposed to be ashamed of. Please welcome our final storyteller, Michelle Yang.
2011. Today is my wedding day. And for the first time, both my hair and my makeup are done professionally. I hardly recognize myself. You see, for so long, I never thought I would be worthy of love, of happiness. No, not a girl like me who would never be thin enough, demure enough, or sane enough. Yet here I am, and the love of my life is waiting outside to marry me in front of all of our loved ones. 1997. I'm 16 years old and the luckiest girl alive. I'm on top of the world. I love everyone. I run through the house shrieking with delight. I drive into the desert sunset with the windows rolled down, the wind whipping through my hair, and I can fly. I am beautiful. Days later, I'm terrified. I don't know what's happening to me. I can't stop worrying. I can't sleep. I feel so ugly and unlovable and fat. I'm an idiot, an imposter who'd somehow convinced all my teachers to give me A's when I can't do anything people expect of me. I just want to die. It's either that or let everyone down. I don't seem to have a choice. Weeks without sleep have me believing that the radio is talking to me, that movies are about me, that people are secretly filming me. I'm famous. I knew it. I figured it out, but people don't know yet, and they're trying to play it cool, so sure, I'll play along. Until, oh my God, I can't believe those were my thoughts. I can't believe those were my delusions. What's wrong with me? This can't be normal. I'm so terrified. I turn to my parents for help. My dad says, "A mental doctor? No, that's too risky. What if it gets on your permanent record and then no colleges will take you no matter how good your grades are? And what if word got out? Who would marry you? Your life would be over. We can't. It's too risky." Is this true? Would seeking help spell my doom? I'm trapped in this loop, not knowing why I'm like this. One day after school, my dad tells me to get into the truck. I don't know where we're going. He drives us 8 hours across state lines to the office of a family doctor. He's the relative of a friend, someone who could be trusted to keep things off the record. I'm terrified, but excited at the same time to finally learn what's wrong with me. So I tell him everything, the radio, the movies, the not sleeping. And then I walk out into the darkened hallway to await my verdict, holding my breath. When my dad finally comes out, he's silent and solemn. He won't meet my eyes. We get back into the truck, and he still hasn't said a word. So finally I ask him, "Baba, what's wrong with me? What did the doctor say?" "Nothing's wrong with you. You have an overactive imagination. You just need to get some sleep." Just get some sleep. Something I've been trying and failing to do for years. If I could just do that, we wouldn't be here. The pit in my stomach sinks deeper. If the doctor can't diagnose what's wrong with me, that means I'm what's wrong. I'm the problem. I'm the failure. How will I survive being this complete failure when failure has never been an option? Four years later, I'm diagnosed with bipolar disorder. After a month of psychosis, I'm hospitalized and finally prescribed a mood stabilizer that works for me. I'm validated and relieved that my condition has a name, and more importantly, a treatment. It meant all these years of suffering, there was a reason. It wasn't my fault. There's a treatment, medication that can help me. I embrace my diagnosis with gratitude. I never want to feel that terror, that out of control again. At the same time, at just 20 years old, I don't know if life will ever be okay again. I suffer debilitating shame and guilt. I can't believe the mess I've made of my life. Everything I worked so hard to build since immigrating as a child seems completely destroyed. Was my life really over at age 20 before it ever really began? I felt so alone and hopeless. Yet I forced myself not to give up. I forced myself just to put one foot in front of the other. Now, nearly 20 years have passed. I'm almost 40 years old, and my husband and I have been happily married for nearly a decade. We're parents to a hilarious 7-year-old who tells us every day that he's a nature wizard, and an incorrigible but adorable rescue pup rounds out our family and keeps us all on our toes. I take my medication every day without fail. I avoid even caffeine to protect my sleep. I avoid alcohol and drugs. I see my psychiatrist and my therapist regularly, and I've done the hard emotional labor to face my traumas, to understand my triggers, and to heal. And with this commitment to treatment and wellness, I thrive. I earn my MBA, and I go on to work at one of the most well-known nonprofits in the country. And later, do marketing for two of the most successful corporations in the world. Yet there's still a skeleton in my closet, eating away at me. I allow the shame to keep me feeling small. I keep my diagnosis a secret from my colleagues, my employer, most people I know. The shame keeps me on the outside. It makes me feel smaller and smaller until I can't take it anymore. That's when I go out seeking a different kind of help. That's when I discover NAMI support groups. And for the first time, I have a safe place to talk about my struggles with people who've been through it firsthand. Within weeks, I become a facilitator. My experience in the groups and the training I received from NAMI help nurture my courage and develop my voice as a mental health advocate. I realize that I can't advocate for myself or anyone if I don't first admit my own struggles. I write an essay called "My Mental Illness Did Not Prevent Me from Succeeding, but the Stigma Nearly Did." And it gets published on the Huffington Post. So I come out of my closet in a big way and brace for trolls. I'm terrified. At the same time, I feel an incredible sense of relief. For the first time, I can breathe. I am free. And to my surprise, the trolls never come. Instead, I receive an outpouring of support from readers and from people in my past who reached out to tell me that they too had been suffering alone, when we could have been supporting each other all along. Turns out I'm not alone. I never was. Living with a mental illness does not define me. It is not a life sentence like I once feared. As a happy, thriving individual with bipolar disorder, I'm in the majority of people who live with mental health conditions, not the minority. So I'm here to join the fight against stigma. I'm here to change the narrative on mental illness. My 20-year-old self would never believe that life actually works out. So I want to tell my younger self and anyone out there like me that life gets better, so much better.
6 storytellers, 6 stories, 6 human beings standing in for the millions of people who deal day in and day out with mental health struggles or with loved ones who have their own mental health struggles. And if these stories touched you tonight, if you were struck by the courage of these storytellers sharing their stories in spite of the stigma that still exists around mental health struggles, if one of these stories touched a part of your story or reminded you of someone you know, then I hope you'll consider supporting NAMI Washington, because NAMI's mission is to make sure that everyone can share their stories, that everyone can connect with one another and connect with the kinds of treatment, resources, and support that they need. So if that matters to you, please consider supporting NAMI Washington. Thank you so much for your help, and thank you for joining us.